أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وهادينا وحبيب قلوبنا والشفيع نفوسنا حبيب إله العالمين ولا حبيب إلا هو وأهله الذي سمى في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل وسلم على محمد وآل محمد. قال الله العظيم في محكم كتابه الكريم وقوله الحق والأصدق القائلين أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وما الحياة الدنيا إلا لعب ولهو ولدار الآخرة خير للذين يتقون أفلا تعقلون. For today's discussion, inshallah, I wanted to take a look at a really beautiful piece of advice from Imam Ali alayhi salam, as mentioned within An-Nahj al-Balagha, as well as within other sources as well, where the Imam alayhi salam offers us a bit of a roadmap in terms of how we should see life. And oftentimes it's hard to rethink or to reprogram our minds or our hearts or our souls or ourselves in terms of how we perceive life. But these days, particularly in this month of Sha'ban, we get closer to the holy month of Ramadan. It's an opportunity for us to undoubtedly rethink a lot of things. Because as we approach the month of Ramadan, the ultimate objective is that we leave that month with not only a purified heart, but a heart filled with virtue and value and a renewed sense of purpose. And it all starts with how much work that we put in prior to getting there that allows for us to maximize the benefit of us getting there. And so you'll see that many of our ahadith, that which is narrated by the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, as well as a deduction by various of our classical and also contemporary ulama that speak to this importance and significance of utilizing and exerting ourselves in the months of Rajab and Sha'ban in order to purify the heart and empty it of all sin, so that during the month of Ramadan it's ready for this sort of new awakening and a new beginning that inshallah we'll be able to take benefit from. And during this month, which is known as the month of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Shahru Sha'banu Shahri, in the words of the Prophet alayhi salam, he states that this month of Sha'ban is my month. It was a month in which he would himself exhaust himself in obedience and in worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by means of fasting during the day and prayers during the night. And through that stance and through that instruction and through that inspiration that we gain from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, inshallah we're able to put forth a little bit of that effort so that we're able to also make benefit from this month, inshallah ta'ala. I want to take a look again at a famous hadith from Imam Ali alayhi salam mentioned in Nahj al-Balagha according to different versions, either 123, 126, there was a typo on the advertising, but either saying 123 or 124 or 125 or 126 according to different variations, in which the Imam alayhi salatu wasalam, he talks about what he is amazed by. And through these lines of the Imam and through these advices of the Imam alayhi salam, we're able to deduce a variety of lessons. And he utters 6 statements that I want to take a look at for this evening, inshallah ta'ala. Let's go through line by line of the words or of the advice of the Imam alayhi salam again, and we'll be able to see the way that he saw life. So hopefully we'll be able to see it with a little bit more clarity as well once we look through the eyes of Ali salamullah alayhi. He states, "Ajibtu lil bakhil يستعجل الفقر الذي منه حرم ويفوته الغنى الذي إياه طلب فيعيش في الدنيا عيش الفقراء وَيُحَاسِبُ فِي الْآخِرَةِ حِسَابَ الْأَغْنِيَاءِ. The Imam alayhi salam, he famously, in this line that I've undoubtedly uttered in front of many of you in the past as well, in different conversations, he states, I am amazed at the one who is stingy. عَجِبْتُ لِلْبَخِيلِ يَسْتَعْجِلُ الْفَقْرُ الَّذِي مِنْهُ هَرَبْ. I am amazed at the one who is stingy, who approaches the poverty that he's running away from. وَيَفُوتُهُ الْغِنَى الَّذِي إِيَّاهُ طَلَبْ. And he's losing the wealth that he initially was desiring. Why does someone become stingy? Why does someone choose not to spend out of their wealth? Primarily because they want to make more money. So they want to make sure that they're being very scarce with their means, or in terms of their expenditure of means, and they're holding on to everything and not spending it because they're afraid that the money is going to run out. Fair enough? فَيَعِيشُ فِي الدُّنْيَا عِيشُ الْفُقَرَاءِ وَيُحَاسِبُ فِي الْآخِرَةِ حِسَابُ الْأَغْنِيَاءِ. So he lives this life, he lives a life of poverty in this world, but in the world beyond this one, he will be accounted from amongst the wealthy. What is the Imam alayhi salam trying to say in this first line? He states that when an individual holds on and hoards on to their wealth and to their provisions, and they refuse to spend them, at the end of the day, more likely than not, we're going to accumulate and accumulate and accumulate, only to die, only to have our inheritors receive that money and to receive that wealth. We will have been preparing for a later time in our dunya, but at the same time, we'll never be able to truly be satisfied and content if every day we're counting how much money that we have. And at the same time, we're going to have amassed all of this wealth by the end of our life, only for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hold us accountable on the Day of Judgment and ask, why did you have all of this money in your bank account and why did you die with it? Why didn't you spend it? Why didn't you do something meaningful for it with it? And what's the excuse that we would have given? We would say, oh Allah, but I was saving it for something really, really important. But there was nothing important that came other than the fact that your inheritors, your children, they made a lot of money off of everything that you left behind in your bank accounts. And we have an abundance of ahadith and tradition of the Prophet and his family alayhim salam that talk about the fact that through an expenditure of our wealth in a way that's legitimate, in a way that's even preferred, is to spend it, for instance, on our family, on our needs, to not be stingy with our wealth. And in that way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will increase our rizq, He will increase our sustenance by means of spending, as long as it's something, again, permissible. We are obligated to pay various taxes throughout the course of the year. In Shi'i law, we have this obligatory tax known as the khums, which is to be paid 20% on the surplus of one's income every year. That's not a small amount. Someone says, why is it so much? At the end of the day, it's not a loophole in accordance with our text and in accordance with Islamic law to utilize that money that you would have otherwise spent on homes on yourself. There's nothing wrong with it. In fact, it's encouraged because we are not meant to be a people or a community or a believer or an individual who hoards our wealth only to, have to pay all of these exorbitant, seemingly for many people, taxes on our wealth in the first place. Meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you this blessing, so why are you holding on to it? Because at the end of the day, that accumulation plus accumulation plus accumulation is only going to allow for us to be never in a state of content. We'll never be in a state of contentment in this dunya, and on the Day of Judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will say, you didn't do anything with your money, and now you have to be held to account for every single penny that you did not spend, let alone the ones that you do spend on dumb things, for instance, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also going to hold us account for the way that we spend our wealth. Na'udhu billahi min dhalik. So there's a couple of benefits that we can derive from line number one, but the most important one of them, which is going to be a common theme for the latter ones as well, is the methodology by which Imam Ali alayhi salam, he speaks. You know, when we know that being stingy or being cheap with our wealth, or any of these other qualities that the Imam Ali is going to be mentioning thereafter, there are certain characteristics and vices of the human heart. Be it pride, be it arrogance, be it miserliness, be it whatever it might be. But there's a technique in the way that we're supposed to explain that to other people in order to get them to not act in that way anymore. Is that fair to say? If you get scolded every time you make a mistake in your place of employment, you are much less inclined to figuring out a way to doing it well, in comparison with if someone gave you some meaningful, constructive criticism that began with some praise. It's much easier for me to tell my child that they should eat their meal by giving them sort of positive words of encouragement, telling them that if you eat this, you're going to become strong. If you eat this, you're going to have energy to play. If you eat this, you're going to have the ability to do X or Y or Z. As opposed to, you better eat this food, otherwise, whatever, right? You're going to get in big trouble. No one likes to be told anything that way. Is that fair to say? No one likes to be scolded. Imam Ali alayhi salam teaches us in these lines, as well as an abundance of other ahadith, and we learn this from, of course, the instruction of the whole Qur'an and the etiquette of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that the performance of Amr bil Ma'ruf or Nahy anil Munkar, enjoining the good and forbidding the evil, you need to have a strategy in the way that we're doing it. So the Imam alayhi salam doesn't condemn someone, who is not spending out of their wealth or being stingy or being miserly in any way, but rather he states, I'm amazed at the one who has this wealth and chooses not to spend it. Because at the end of the day, in this life, they're going to live a life of poverty. You're never going to enjoy life because you're always going to be saving your money. And at the end of the day, no matter how much you make, you're still going to be living a life of poverty. And you want to become rich, you're never going to become rich because everything's sitting in the bank account. So you're never going to be able to live that life. But when you die, you would have died a death in this dunya in poverty because you never bought yourself anything and you never treated your family particularly well. But on the Day of Judgment, Allah is going to hold you in the rank of all of the wealthy, saying you had this, but you never did anything with it. What's going on? Number 2, the second line of the Imam alayhi salam. He states, وَعَجِبْتُ لِلْمُتَكَبِّرِ الَّذِي كَانَ بِالْأَمْسِ نُطْفَةً وَيَكُونُ غَدًا جِيفًا. He states, and I'm amazed at the one who is arrogant, who yesterday came from a drop of semen, and tomorrow will be a corpse with the poor stench to it. At the end of the day, that's the nature and the reality of who we are as a human being. Which is why it's so important to humble ourselves as often as possible and remind ourselves of precisely who we are. We're all seeking something. We're all seeking to be validated. We're all seeking some sort of semblance of importance. And we do things oftentimes in order to seemingly gain respect from those around us. But at the end of the day, the only one that we need to impress, like we know, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And through humility to Him, Azza wa Jal, we're able to understand exactly what our role and responsibility in this world is, and also get that validation from everyone else. Because when you're not looking for people to please, but you're looking for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to please, well then, people as well will also find pleasure in your presence. In the words of Ali alayhi salam, he states, "Man tawada'a lillahi rafa'ahu," that the one who humbles themselves in front of God, God will raise them in front of people. The Imam alayhi salam, in this line, he states, "Ajibtu lil mutakabbir." I'm amazed at the one who is arrogant, who thinks that they're better than others, who thinks that they are important, who thinks that they are so valuable in the eyes of others, or in their own eyes. When all they have to do is remind themselves that they came from something impure, and they're going to lead to something impure. That's exactly who the human being is. If you think of it, again, we come from najasa, and we're going to lead to najasa, and that's what we are. That is who the human being is. And through that sense of humility in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're able to truly understand that we're not this physical body, that we're something far greater. A bunch of us just came back from the performance of Umrah, and we had the opportunity to visit the Messenger of God sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, as well as Baytullah al-Haram. And we enter into the state of Ihram in the Miqat, and we enter into the holy city of Mecca, and we wear the most simplistic of clothing, and we have all of these prohibitions. Many of you were also present a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about our sort of pre-Umrah session. And there are so many things in that state of Ihram that are prohibited. And amongst those things that are prohibited in the state of Ihram is utilizing scents or fragrances. No deodorant, no cologne, no soap, no brushing teeth, no chewing gum. Because at the end of the day, we are supposed to remind ourselves of our most primordial state. We wear an ihram. For men, we wear 2 pieces of clothing to cover our body, and that's it. To remind ourselves that these are also the same pieces of clothing that I'm going to enter myself into when I enter into that grave of mine. And we are told that there are no fragrances, nor should we walk away from a bad smell, a bad stench, because at the end of the day, that's exactly what we are going to become and how we're going to end up. If an insect climbs on top of our body, it is forbidden for us to kill that insect. Why? Because when we're a corpse, you can't kill all of those mosquitoes and spiders and bugs that are crawling over you. We are who we are at that moment, and we don't have any control over anything physical around us. And I don't mean this at all to sound cryptic. That's the reality of the human being. But when we understand that it's much more important for us to cultivate the inner as opposed to the external, as opposed to the outer, then at the end of the day, that's the value behind all of this. That's the objective, the goal that we're working toward. وَعَجِبْتُ لِلْمُتَكَبِّرِ. So I'm amazed at the one who's arrogant. الَّذِي كَانَ بِالْأَمْسِ نُطْفَةً وَيَكُونُ غَدًا جِيفًا. Who yesterday came from a drop of sperm, from a drop of semen, وَيَكُونُ غَدًا جِيفًا. And tomorrow will be this corpse with a foul stench. The third line of the Imam alayhi salam. وَعَجِبْتُ لِمَنْ شَكَّ فِي اللَّهِ وَهُوَ يَرَى خَلْقَ اللَّهِ. Or in another version, وَهُوَ يَرَى آيَاتِ اللَّهِ. And I'm amazed at the one who doubts in God when he sees around him all of the creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Really, we talked about this some weeks ago as well. For someone to have doubt in Allah Azza wa Jal, but to be surrounded consistently with the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't make any sense to me. The fact that every single day you can wake up and you can look at your face. The fact that every single day you have to understand that 1,000,000 things in your body need to go right for you to wake up that morning. The fact that the sun rises and the sun sets, it rains one day, it's cloudy the next day, and it's sunny the next day. The fact that we see the altering of the seasons week to week, month to month. The fact that we're able to see our own growth and our own progression, be it physically, ethically, spiritually, academically, whatever it might be. All of that is meant to remind ourselves of just how incredible Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. That He brings us throughout all of these stages during the course of our lives. And He puts on display all of the colors in the sky that He does. And all of the fruits and the vegetables that we have access to. And all of the people that we have experiences with. All of that is out of the blessing and out of the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَعَجِبْتُ لِمَنْ شَكَّ فِي اللَّهِ. And I'm amazed, the Imam alayhi salam says, about the one who doubts in that God, when everything around him or her are the creations of that same God that you doubt. In that famous sort of polemical conversation between Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam and that famous atheist who lived in Mecca. He comes to him, salamullah alayhi, and he tells him, are you the son of Muhammad? He says, yes, I am the son of Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He says, how do you truly believe in this God that you preach? He says, how do you not? And they go back and forth in this lengthy conversation, and Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam famously tells him, he says, why don't you look up at the sun? To which that man glances at the sun only for a moment, and he turns his eyes away. And the Imam alayhi salam, he tells him, he says, you look up at the sun, but you can't even look at it properly because of how bright it is. And you expect, because he came to the Imam alayhi salam telling him that if you worship this God, let me see this God. He says, you can barely see the creation of God, let alone you want to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. He says, it's impossible. You don't have the capacity to understand. So the Imam in this line, he states, وَعَجِبْتُ لِمَنْ شَكَّ فِي اللَّهِ وَهُوَ يَرَى خَلْقَ اللَّهِ. I'm amazed at the one who doubts in this God when we are surrounded by the creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is nothing that can bring us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than contemplating His creation. Really, we see this as a custom and as a sunnah of the Prophet of God sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He would stand outside in the darkness of night after the Isha prayer, and he would be supplicating to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala under the stars. And he would state, Subhanaka ma khalaqta, Rabbana ma khalaqta hadha batila. Oh Allah, you definitely did not create this in vain. Subhanak, all glory be to you. Faqina adhab an-nar. So save me from the punishment of the world beyond this one. Consistently, the Prophet of God sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he would stand outside under the darkness of night, praying under the stars. We see it as a consistent theme within the ayat of the Holy Qur'an as well. God talks about the alternating of the day into the night and the night into the day. He talks about the trees and the oceans, the rivers, all that gets us to hopefully think about thinking about those things, such that we're able to contemplate and again to see and appreciate and understand the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as our means toward getting to Him azza wa jal. So the Imam alayhi salam in the third line of this statement, he states, وَعَجِبْتُ لِمَنْ شَكَّ فِي اللَّهِ وَهُوَ يَرَى خَلْقَ اللَّهِ. And I'm amazed at the one who doubts in God, but consistently around him sees the creations of God. The Imam alayhi salam, he continues, and he states, وَعَجِبْتُ لِمَنْ نَسِيَ الْمَوْتِ وَهُوَ يَرَى الْمَوْتَى. And I'm amazed at the one who forgets about death when he sees death around him. There is nothing perhaps more real that we see around us than death itself, than mortality itself. How many of you have ever been to a funeral before? Be it in a graveyard, be it in somebody's home, a ritual around a funeral where somebody had just lost a loved one. How many of you have been? Overwhelming majority of you. Who's joking at a funeral? Ever seen someone make a joke at a funeral? Why? You could find the most sarcastic person. You could find the most relaxed person in the world and put them in front of someone who is grieving, and all of a sudden you'll see their attitude totally change. Why? Because death is real. That's the realest thing that we see. No one is trying to make a joke or be light about any situation when they see death in front of them. Which is why in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, he states that contemplation of death is the destroyer of every desire. You're thinking about food, remember death, you won't think about food anymore. You think about money, go to a funeral, and you won't be thinking about money anymore. You think about your problems, and you see someone grieving the loss of their loved one, you'll forget your problems. Anything that we desire from this dunya will be forgotten the minute that we see death in front of us. It's all forgotten, it's done. For that moment, at the very least, no one's thinking about it. No one is thinking about it. You could be the busiest person and have your calendar booked from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. like me, right? But if someone dies, you're willing to clean up everything so you can be there, because that is more real than anything else. More real than anything else that we experience. وَأَجِبْتُ لِمَنْ نَسِيَ الْمَوْتِ. With the Imam alayhi salam, he starts this line by stating what? He states, I am amazed at the one who forgets about death. Majority of us, we raised our hand when I asked if you've been to a funeral before. How quickly, how many minutes, how many seconds does it take after leaving that funeral that we forget about death, or we delete it from our memory as fast as possible, or what it is that we just experienced? No one's trying to think about that for a long time. It's too real. And with that reality comes responsibility, and we don't like responsibility. So immediately we push it away. And that's a problem. The Imam alayhi salam, he states, وَأَجِبْتُ لِمَنْ نَسِيَ الْمَوْتِ. I'm amazed at the one who forgets about it. You experienced it, you've seen it. When someone is burying their loved one, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy upon all of your deceased, and have mercy upon us when we are to be buried by our community. وَأَجِبْتُ لِمَنْ نَسِيَ الْمَوْتِ. That at that moment when you are burying your loved one, everyone, people have said this all the time, and I'm sure we've actualized this ourselves, you say, that's the moment I'm going to change my life. You know? If this is what life is going to end up like, I'm going to end up there. I better fix up some of my vices. I better fix up my heart. And that famous sort of hadith stated that some of the companions of Imam Ali alayhi salam were in his company, and as they were lowering the body of one of their companions into the grave, the Imam alayhi salam looks at those next to him, and he says that the life that ends like that is not worth wasting. He walks away, getting these guys to think, wait a minute, you know, that's what it's going to be for every single one of us. Though for many moments during the course of our lives, for years perhaps, we remain totally negligent to that reality. وَأَجِبْتُ لِمَنْ نَسِيَ الْمَوْتَ. And I'm amazed at the one who forgets about death. وَهُوَ يَرَى الْمَوْتَ. But around him consistently sees death. How do we remind ourselves of death, such that we are not those who are negligent of it? The easiest thing to do is to frequent visitation to the cemetery. We are taught within our ahadith, within our tradition, that to visit the cemetery, for instance, on Fridays is encouraged, at least be it once a week. If you can't do it once a week, then once a month. If you can't do it once a month, that amongst those days when it's encouraged to go and visit the cemetery is, anybody know? Yeah, Thursday night, Friday, or? Maybe 15 Shaban. Eid, on the day of Eid. Funny story. I know we're talking about something serious, but just in parenthesis. Last year, at my daughter's school, they asked me to give a presentation on like what is Eid holiday like, what is done on Eid and all this kind of stuff. My daughter was in first grade last year, and I had to speak to her class and to her teachers and to like the university, the school administrators and whatever. So I had like this nice PowerPoint presentation that my wife helped me put together and all this kind of stuff. I don't know how to speak to first graders other than speaking to my daughter. So I said, like, you know, what are some of the things? So the teacher asked me to say, like, what are like 5 things that you do like on Eid day? I said, like, so we give charity in the morning, we pray, we like give sweets, we give gifts, and then I would like visit the graveyard to a bunch of first graders. So one poor kid, you know, God bless him, he raised his hand and he said, so Zainab's dad? And I said, yes. He said, oh, my grandmother died too. And I was like, oh man, you know, I don't know what to say to her. I didn't know what to say to a first grader. My wife's looking at me from like behind the Zoom screen. She's like, go to the next slide. And I'm like, but I want to tell them, like, what do we authentically do? My kids know that we go visit the graveyard. Like, they know that they go visit their family members on the day of Eid. It was a bad idea. Anyway. وَعَجِبْتُ These first graders are never going to forget about death. وَعَجِبْتُ لِمَنْ نَسِيَ الْمَوْتِ. By the way, the teacher said, like, okay, Mr. Jaffer, you should probably move on to the next. And I was like, yeah, okay. وَعَجِبْتُ لِمَنْ نَسِيَ الْمَوْتِ وَهُوَ يَرَى الْمَوْتَ. And I'm amazed at the one who forgets about death when he sees death around him. The Imam alayhi salam continues to line number 5. And again, the Imam alayhi salam could have easily just scolded someone and said, go visit a graveyard. But he didn't say that. He says, I'm amazed at the one who forgets about death. Probably in his company where people don't think about death. Probably in his company where people who are very stingy. Probably people in his company, who are very prideful. Instead of going directly into their flaws, he calls out this general statement. Again, as a call to remind ourselves about how we engage and how we speak to others. This religion is not meant to be heavy. It's meant to be easy. It's meant to be simple. It's meant to be practical. And it all starts via its presentation. That's why I'm wearing a hoodie today. Sorry, guys. وَعَجِبْتُ لِمَنْ أَنْكَرَ النَّشْأَةَ الْأُخْرَى وَهُوَ يَرَى النَّشْأَةَ الْأُولَى. He states, I am amazed at the one who rejects the next life. I'm amazed at the one who rejects the second life when he or she is exposed to this life. We live in this dunya. And before this world, we lived in the womb of our mothers. And before this world, we lived in a world that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew and His awliya. At the end of the day, for anyone to doubt that there might be a world beyond this one is incredibly problematic, because they would have likely not imagined themselves being in this world when they were in the womb of their mothers. So who are you to doubt in the next world when you live in this world? And when you know undoubtedly that you came from an existence that was far smaller, probably a lot more comfortable than this one. And that was when we lived with our moms. Does anyone deny that they lived in that existence, alam al-arham we call it, in the womb of your mother? Does anyone say, no, I never lived there? Can anyone deny that? God bless our mothers. Can anyone deny that we experienced that? You might not remember it. You might be totally negligent of it. Can anyone actually remember it? I can't. But no one will say, there's no way that took place. Go ask your mom. She'll tell you. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy upon your mothers if they've passed. That was real. And there were people who were witness to it. And go and ask them, they experienced it. But now the fact that we doubt that there is a world beyond this one, in itself, or the capacity for a world beyond this one at the very least, that's problematic. Which is why the Imam alayhi salam, he states, I'm amazed. How can you reject the world beyond this one when you live in this one? And you know that you came from something that you had no idea what you were walking into on the day that you were born into this world. Which is why you screamed, which is why you cried, which is why for days, for months, for years you had to adjust to being in this dunya. Because you weren't prepared for it. You didn't know what you were getting yourself into. Similarly, that transition might be difficult, but at the end of the day, to reject it entirely, the Imam alayhi salam says that he is amazed at that man, at that woman. And finally, the Imam salamullah alayhi, he concludes and he states in the 6th line, and perhaps the most important in terms of our practice, وَعَجِبْتُ لِعَامِرِ دَارِ الْفَنَاءِ وَتَارِكِ دَارِ الْبَقَى. He states, I am amazed at the one who builds for the fleeting, transient world, دَارُ الْفَنَاء, this world. وَتَارِكُ دَارِ الْبَقَى, but totally is negligent and forgetful and leaves behind the world that never ends. It suffices that death is a reminder that this world is transient. We know that. We've all experienced it. We've all seen it firsthand. You've all been to graveyards. You've all experienced funerals. You've all have lost those whom you love, and you know what they've all left behind as well. وَعَجِبْتُ لِآمِرِ دَارِ الْفَنَاءِ. So why do you prepare to consistently build for this world? No one is saying not to. But at the expense of that world, what's the point? You're not going to be able to benefit from it for a very long term. It's transient, it's passing. Why are you wasting so much time on it? Focus on the thing that is more important. The Imam alayhi salam is trying to tell us. I'm not saying it's easy. Don't get me wrong. I'm reminding myself of all of these things before I tell anyone else. But at the end of the day, the Imam alayhi salam wants us to think and to reflect and to contemplate upon just how much we exert ourselves for this dunya many a times with total neglect for the world beyond this one. And in the ayah of the Qur'an that I began with, the Imam alayhi salam, he states, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in chapter 6 verse number 32, he states about this world and what it is that we exert and what it is that we prepare and what it is that we sort of give to it. He states, وَمَا الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا إِلَّا لَعِبٌ وَلَهْوٌ. He says, and what is this world except for play, except for a game? وَلَدَارُ الْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لِلَّذِينَ يَتَّقُونَ. And the world beyond this one is far better, as long as we have taqwa, as long as we're God conscious, as long as we see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. Do you not think? Do you not contemplate? And in the famous advice of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam to his son Al-Hasan salamullah alayhi, he states in that famous line, live for this world like you are going to live forever, and live for the next world like you are going to die tomorrow. To have a balance between this world and the next. No one is saying, again, not to benefit. In fact, the very first line of these 6 statements was to take your wealth and to spend it, and to do things that you care about, and be sort of strategic with your sustenance. Nothing wrong with that. Again, but don't only commit to that. Don't only commit to this world with the expense of the next world. وَعَجِبْتُ لِعَامِرِ دَارِ الْفَنَاءِ وَتَارِكْ دَارِ الْبَقَاءِ. So in summary, my friends, we learn from these 6 statements from Imam Ali alayhi salatu wassalam about how he himself sees life. And it starts again by looking through the prism of understanding that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is at the center of it. And that we work slowly and make these sort of micro steps in the pathway to being more God-centric, to being more God-conscious, and to understand that our perspective on life undoubtedly has to change, and that by utilizing these nights and days of Sha'ban leading up to hopefully being more reflective and contemplative during the month of Ramadan, then inshallah we have the potential to be amongst those who see with our heart truly the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to see this world. Walhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina wa Nabiyina Muhammad wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin.